Good afternoon, Dr. Rusher.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being patient as I navigate today.
I think everybody was trying to navigate. We were going to give everybody just a minute or two more since everybody had some obligations this afternoon. I do think we have a quorum. Oh, now I know we do. So we do have this meeting being recorded. It's also streaming as well. And I want to make sure that our IT department is able to do that. And I also wanted just to point out for the members to make sure that they saw the email from this afternoon that had the latest public comment we received this afternoon, like noon. So you did not. I have it up on my screen and I'm happy to share it.
Yeah, I did not get to see that. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. It was emailed around, I don't even know what time at this point, but I do have it on my screen, so I can share it at the appropriate time.
Okay.
Hello, Meg Barrett. Thanks for joining us today. Stephanie, it is 5:03, and Dr. Haraway Smith, I see you've popped on too. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to turn it over to you, Ms. Godfrey.
All right. Good afternoon. This called meeting of the Midwifery Joint Committee will now convene. My name is Stephanie Godfrey, and I'm the presiding chair of the Midwifery Joint Committee. Since this meeting is being held virtually via Microsoft Teams, it's being recorded for record purposes. Moderator Abby Lefevre will now conduct an official roll call for declaration of a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Godfrey. Please respond present when your name is called. Stephanie Godfrey.
Present.
Dr. Jason Hildebrand.
Present.
Dr. Carolyn Haraway Smith.
Present.
Dr. LaDonna Thomas.
Present.
Dr. Raquel Ingram. She's not present. Frank DeMarco.
Present.
Dr. Sharona Johnson.
Present.
Dr. Robert Rich.
Present.
Meg Barrett.
Present.
And Dr. John Rusher.
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Godfrey, we have a quorum for this called meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Lefevre. Should there be discussion or questions from the Midwifery Joint Committee members during this virtual meeting, please identify yourself by name before addressing the matter. In accordance with the State Ethics Act and the Code of Conduct for members of the Midwifery Joint Committee, it is the duty of every member to avoid both conflicts of interest and appearances of conflict. Does any Midwifery Joint Committee member have any known conflict of interest or appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before the Midwifery Joint Committee today? If so, please identify yourself in the conflict or appearance of conflict and refrain from any undue participation in the particular matter. We will conduct this meeting in accordance with the Roberts Rules of Order. Any voting will be conducted by roll call. Following discussion of any motions, I will call for a motion and a second prior to a roll call of all Midwifery Joint Committee members. When making a motion, the Midwifery Joint Committee member shall state their name for the record-keeping purposes. I will call on each individual Midwifery Joint Committee member for their official vote, and committee members should respond appropriately regarding the motion before them. If there's a motion to amend the main motion on the floor, the amended motion will be acted on prior to any action on the main motion. If an amendment is defeated, the main motion as originally stated is voted on. If an amendment passes, the main motion as amended is voted on. Are there any questions regarding the review of Robert's Rules of Order? All right, tonight's meeting was scheduled following the close of the public comment for the temporary midwifery rules addressing the enactment of Senate Bill 20. The purpose of this meeting is to vote on the proposed temporary rules and direct staff to proceed with the temporary rulemaking process. At this time, I would like to ask Meredith Paris to present the information shared in the meeting packet and provide an update on the status of the temporary rules.
Thank you, Ms. Godfrey. On July 12th and 17th, this committee met to discuss and voted to proceed on proposed amendments and adoptions for temporary rulemaking. The committee directed staff to proceed with filing these temporary rules following the meeting, and staff did so on July 20th. Staff then notified interested parties by email. These rules were also posted on the Board of Nursing website and the Board of Nursing social media distributed notification that the Midwifery Committee was in temporary rulemaking process. The public comment period began on July 26th and ended on August 17th. A public hearing was held at the Office of the Board of Nursing on August the 8th at 1 p.m. No comments were received following the public hearing of substance, save for the one that we received this afternoon, and you received by email around 2:20. I'll also share that at the appropriate time if needed. The next step that this committee needs to decide is to vote on these rules and direct staff to proceed with temporary rulemaking and file the temporary rules. In the packet that you received today, you'll find a copy of all of the public comments received during the public comment period. Again, that's barring the comment we received today. There were 5 comments received, and from those comments, staff identified 2 rules which address these comments specifically and would be recommending additional clarification in the language. Madam Chair, if I could go ahead and address these 2 rules as an overview, and I believe that the packet that was provided for you all has the amendments highlighted in blue that would be different from what you voted on back in July. So the first application, the first rule that we looked at was 0103 application. And the 2 questions that arose from the public comment period was, number 1, does a CNM still have to hold an active license in every jurisdiction in which they have held one? The answer to this question is no. The additional highlighted language in blue in your packet was added, which clarifies that applicants have to hold an unencumbered license or approval to practice in any jurisdiction which has been held. The intent is so that the applicant can't outrun discipline on their license without resolving it in another state first, and therefore the clarification that no unencumbrances on any previous licenses was added to 0103. The second question posed was regarding CNMs coming from another jurisdiction that already has independent practice. The question was, must they have obtained the 24-month, 4,000 hours clinical practice requirement in collaboration with another provider? For this question, I would draw your attention to 0103, subsection A7. The second sentence currently reads that for those seeking independent practice as a CNM, the clinical experience shall be in collaboration with a collaborating provider. Based on the public comment and feedback, staff revisited the language of Senate Bill 20 and would propose striking this sentence. It aligns with Senate Bill 20 in that if you have the 24 months of clinical practice in addition to the 4,000 hours, or in conjunction with the 4,000 hours of clinical practice, then they can practice independently, which appears to be the intent of Senate Bill 20. So if they've been practicing independently and can meet those qualifications coming from another jurisdiction, we're not essentially starting the clock back so that they have to do the additional time with a collaborating provider. So it is not highlighted in blue, but it's under A7, the second sentence, which reads in full, the clinical experience shall be in collaboration with a collaborating provider. Staff is proposing striking through that second sentence altogether based on the public comment and feedback. The second rule that we identified following the public comment period that needed to be addressed or could benefit from some additional clarification is 0118, birth outside of a hospital setting. That's the first public comment that you have in your packet that addresses this rule specifically. Staff again revisited Senate Bill 20 and looked at 9178.4, which was specifically amended to address planned births outside of a hospital setting. It's in the language of Senate Bill 20 under A3 in 178.4 that home births are specifically referenced and limits situations for home births to low-risk pregnancies. The language that's highlighted in blue would be the suggestions from staff to clarify this language so that it aligns with Senate Bill 20 and is not more restrictive than what the statute has as written. Madam Chair, I'm happy to go ahead and address, if you'd like, go ahead and address these and then come back up with the newer public comment, since that'll involve some screen sharing if you prefer. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So just to conclude, staff would recommend that the committee adopt the remaining rules that were in your packet with the published notice of text, holding off 0115 for further discussion based on the last public comment, but adopting the remainder as they were called or as they were voted on at the July called meeting. We would recommend that the committee review the proposed changes to 0103 and 0118 in light of the public comments and amend the language as it's been provided for you. We would then ask that you direct staff to proceed with the temporary rulemaking process. The rules would then be presented to the Rules Review Commission approximately September 21st and would be entered into the administrative code on October 1st for an effective date. The committee would then take up permanent rulemaking at its November annual meeting. And these temporary rules will remain in effect until the permanent rules have been entered into the code. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I just have one clarifying question. The additional public comment that we're going to address after voting on the ones that we're not changing, is that part of the 0103?
So that's 0115 that I would recommend you holding off on, because that's the inactive status, which addresses the refresher comment.
Okay. So based on this information, I'd like to proceed with the temporary rules that remain unchanged from our meeting on July 17th. This includes the rules in the packet: 0101, administrative body and definitions; 0104, provider collaboration required; 0105, disciplinary action; 0111, continuing education; 0112, scope of practice; 0114, annual renewal; 0116, collaborative provider agreement; and 0117, prescriptive authority. Is there a need for further discussion on those proposed temporary rules? Excellent. Is there a motion to adopt these rules and direct staff to proceed with rulemaking?
Frank DeMarco, so move.
DeMarco has made a motion. Do I have a second?
This is LaDonna, second.
LaDonna Thomas has seconded the motion. Now that we have a second, I will call for a vote. When your name is called, please respond approve if you're in favor of the motion or opposed if you are not in favor of the motion. Dr. Jason Hildebrand.
Approve.
Dr. Carolyn Haraway-Smith.
Approve.
Dr. LaDonna Thomas.
Approve.
Frank DeMarco.
Approve.
Dr. Sharana Johnson.
Approve.
Dr. Robert Rich.
Approve.
Meg Barrett.
Approve.
Dr. John Rusher.
Approve.
Stephanie Godfrey. Approve. Motion passes. Turning our attention to 0103 application, staff has made a recommendation for edits as they appear in the packet based on feedback from the public comment period. Is there need for discussion regarding staff's recommendation to clarify the language in 0103? Is there a motion to adopt the amendments to Rule 0103 application as proposed to direct staff to proceed with rulemaking?
So move.
Was that LaDonna Thompson?
Yes.
Thomas? Yeah, Dr. LaDonna
yes.
Thomas, that's okay, has made a motion. Do I have a second?
Second. This is Dr. Sharana Johnson.
Sharana Johnson has seconded the motion. Now that we have a second, I'll call for a vote. When your name is called, please respond approve if you're in favor of the motion or opposed if you're not in favor of the motion. Dr. Jason Hildebrand.
Approve.
Dr. Carolyn Haraway-Smith.
Approve.
Dr. LaDonna Thomas.
Approve.
Frank DeMarco.
Approve.
Dr. Sharana Johnson,
Approved.
Dr. Robert Rich,
Approve.
Meg Barrett,
Approve.
Dr. John Rusher,
approve,
Stephanie Godfrey, approved. The motion passes. Rule 0118, birth outside hospital setting, has also received feedback in the form of a public comment. Based on feedback, staff has recommended the proposed edits to the language in this rule. Is there any discussion regarding the proposed changes to the language in 0118?
This is Dr. Johnson. Meredith, can you just clarify what exactly they were asking to be changed? I've read it a couple times and I think I'm missing what we had to adapt or change.
Yes, thank you. And I think, was that Dr. Johnson?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Johnson. I appreciate the question. I too had to read it a couple of times to realize that what we had initially was so Senate Bill 20 distinguishes home births, and in their language, they say in two separate places, they say birth outside hospital setting, and then they also distinguish that in A3 as home birth. And only under the home birth section do they include the language that this has to be a low risk pregnancy from ACOG. So anything contraindicated by ACOG, which right now the three things were fetal malpresentation, multiple gestation, and a prior cesarean, was restricted, and that's for home births only. So when Ami Goldstein submitted her comment, she pointed out that there are birthing centers who would fall outside of a hospital setting, but don't fall in line with a home birth. So they're distinguished from a home birth. And so because the language is specific to home births in 178.4A3, we made sure that the limitation under the revised rule before you today in C is specific to home birth settings. And we struck the home birth requirement from A, which talks about, so it's birth out, it applies to births outside hospital settings, which means it applies to both birthing centers and home births, but specifically home births can no longer or cannot participate in anything contraindicated by ACOG.
Thank you.
So everything up through B still applies to birth center births,
Yes.
and then just the contraindication for a C&M attending a birth.
For home births.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, accredited birth centers are not likely to be doing any of these things if they want to keep their accreditation, but I think that was part of it.
I'm not sure if that was what the point of her comment was, because that doesn't make sense to me.
I think the point of her comment was kind of to your point, Dr. Hildebrand, last time, including that ACOG statement that could potentially change. I think it was trying to not be potentially restricting to birth centers as opposed to specifically home birth like the Senate bill was specific about. Marcus Jemison, your hand is up.
Yes, I think it might be helpful for, because I had the same questions that Dr. Johnson that you had, and Meredith and I spoke through this, talked through this yesterday, and Meredith was really helpful in having me conceptualize it. And the only way I could conceptualize it was basically to look at the statute. So if I can, I think I can share my screen and let me have the, I'm not sure if I, yeah. If y'all can see this, this is the law that is being referenced in the comment. And as Meredith said, any certified midwife who attends a planned birth outside of a hospital setting, and a planned birth outside of a hospital setting could be in the home or it could be in a birthing center. The nurse midwife has to do these things, A1 through A5. And then when you get to A2, it also says certified nurse midwife who attends a planned birth outside of a hospital setting. Again, that could be in the home or in an accredited birthing center. They have to do these things, about the emergent and non-emergent transfer. Then when you get into A3, whoops, scroll down too much. Then it says planned home births. So the term planned birth outside of a home setting, outside of a hospital setting, I'm sorry, that's not the same term. So what we got here is a different term, planned home births. Then a certified nurse midwife has to be limited to low-risk pregnancy as defined by ACOG. So the rule, according to the public comment, was the language about only what the nurse midwife is limited to low-risk pregnancies as defined by ACOG. That only pertains to planned home births. Because Senate Bill 20, as Meredith said, just uses this more narrow term. This is a more narrow term than the term that appears in A2, which is planned birth outside of a hospital setting, and A1, which is also a planned birth out of a hospital setting. So, and I think that's what the comment was actually, and I'll stop sharing my screen, was being pertained to. And like I said, Meredith walked me through it yesterday. I didn't understand it, and hopefully that helps y'all conceptualize it as well. There are some requirements that pertain to both home and birthing centers, and those are the planned births outside of a hospital setting. And then A3 is very narrow, and that's the hospital setting. So I agree with the edit, and it was a good pickup by Meredith.
Was there any further discussion?
I mean, I think in a perfect world, it would be more clear. I mean, sometimes people call things birth centers that are attached to a hospital. I mean, like, if you really get into the weeds of this, it would be better to have freestanding birth center, or either all out of hospital births are the same, or you delineate freestanding birth centers from home births. But given the way the law was written, I think that this is an appropriate, utilization of those, of what we have to work with.
I agree. I used to work at Hopkins in Baltimore, which is like the antithesis of a birth center, and they would call themselves the birthing center of Johns Hopkins, which I always thought was kind of funny. Well, great. Is there a motion to adopt the amendment to Rule 0118 birth outside hospital setting as proposed in the packet, and direct staff to proceed with rulemaking?
So moved, Dr. Johnson.
Dr. Johnson has made a motion. Do I have a second?
Second, Dr. Haraway-Smith.
Dr. Haraway-Smith has seconded the motion. Now that we have a second, I will call for a vote. When your name is called, please respond approve if you're in favor of the motion, or opposed if you're not in favor of the motion. Dr. Jason Hildebrand.
Approve.
Dr. Carolyn Haraway-Smith.
Approved.
Dr. LaDonna Thomas.
Approved.
Frank DeMarco.
Approve.
Dr. Serrano Johnson.
Approved.
Dr. Robert Rich.
Approved.
Meg Barrett.
Approved.
Dr. John Rusher.
Approve.
Stephanie Godfrey. Approve. Motion passes. Do you want to add now the that third public comment?
Yeah, if I could, I know Mr. DeMarco indicated that he was not able to see the email, and I apologize for sending it out so later. The board staff did accept the public comment, even though it was outside of the comment time period, because it does specifically reference the temporary rules before you today, and we got it in time to get it to you. So I was going to go ahead and share my screen for those of you who were not able to see the public comment, and it is on 2 screens, but at least you can get the gist of it. And are you able to see the public comment now? Again, this is Ami Goldstein. She sent in a
Yes,
public
ma'am.
comment
Yes.
at, okay,
Yes, ma'am,
good,
you can see it.
great. Please let me know if I need to scroll in. So basically, to sum up, it's asking why 2 years was picked as a refresher course requirement if you're out of practice for a period of 2 years, meaning that you are unlicensed for 2 years or don't have an approval for 2 years, that you would have to go back and do a refresher course. One of the things that Ami Goldstein points out is that there isn't a refresher course offered by AHEC in North Carolina. This is something that we as staff discussed when we were researching the rules, and so I'm going to ask for Dr. Luisana to speak to this specifically.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Kim Luisana. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure. So regarding this public comment, when we were in the depths of rationale for proposing the refresher for CNMs, I'd like to refer back to the standard for the American Midwifery Certification Board, which is the certifying body, I'm sure, in affiliation with the guidelines with the ACNM, the American College of Nurse Midwives. They have a very structured continuing ed and renewal model for education, which is the certificate, certification maintenance program. However, in the for reentry into practice, they provide guidance and recommendations. These guidance and recommendations say for reentry into practice, we suggest a didactic and clinical experience model tailored to the CNM for reentry. And they have a very clearly defined example and a lot of information for these reentry guidelines, and that's with ACNM, who does the core competency structures, so on and so forth. So with that, we went back to what we currently require for NPs and clinical nurse specialists with their refresher courses, and it really does align with the ACNM's reentry guidelines with a didactic and a clinical experience model. And it starts for anybody who's been out of practice greater than 2 years. So the rationale really is based on that and the fact that the CE requirements that are in the refresher courses include pharmacotherapeutics, which is a field we know that this field rapidly changes, and that practice guidelines, and since pharmacotherapeutics evolve within a few years quite often, that it was recommended using the existing refresher course structure for reentry into practice for CNMs. And this would provide all of the CNMs a standardized approach to ensure CE and clinical experiences that be in place prior to caring for North Carolina patients. And as far as the concern for barriers to entry into practice, we do this a lot, like I said, with NPs and clinical nurse specialists, more so NPs just from sheer volume of licensees. And a lot of times we definitely tailor it to each licensee based on where they're going to practice, what their population focus is. But what's most important is a lot of times we work with the licensees and their employer who they've decided to work with, and we build that in this whole structure into their orientation time. And if you look at our refresher course guidelines and what we include, any CE they've taken in the last year is automatically applied to the CE requirements for the refresher course. And the bulk of it is ensuring that at least it's really over half of the CE is pharmacotherapeutics within their population focus, or a broader pharmacology requirement if they've been out, say, greater than 5 years. And then the orientation, the clinical experience can be built in with their preceptor at their new position. So it really does align with the recommendations that exist with the ACNM's recommendations, and it already exists in North Carolina for the CNSs and NPs. And like I said, we do integrate it with a new employer or a job if they've already found one. So I hope that helps. I'm happy to answer any questions.
That does help. Thank you for that.
I guess where I'm just unclear about is, I understand, like I literally have someone starting in October who has not practiced in several years. And so as she got credentialed, it was required that part of her credentialing was an understanding that she has a reentry to practice plan, which we don't require for even new grads. So, but I guess I'm not clear about like whether we can, how we mandate that, because it seems like that's on the employer. And what, am I missing something?
So a scenario that might be similar would be if I get a call from a licensee saying, okay, I've been out of practice for 3 years, you have this requirement, how do I work through this? We would say submit your plan of action with your new employer, and we integrate that into the refresher program / process. So I think the ACNM recommendations do say relate to the employers, but we all know that that may vary across the state. And I think that what I found was this was recommended this is different across the country depending on which state requires these sorts of things, but that we had this model that already existed that did align, and it, by requiring it for reentry in North Carolina, as we do, like I said, the other APRN roles, that it would standardize to make sure that CNMs had these didactic and clinical experiences for reentry as per the recommendations. So it was, but I do hear what you're saying, and that program with your particular CNM that's coming on would easily transfer to the refresher program, and we would be having discussions one-on-one for that approval process. Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the when you try to think just trying to think about like whether that restricts somebody who wanted to open their own practice. How would they? And the majority of midwives are employed, right? So they would have to, as long as there was a pathway whereby somebody could say, I'm going to go and shadow or have a clinical experience at this place, and they could still would they have a license while they were waiting? Like, what would be their license status then while they were doing that training up?
So I defer to Meredith overall for the overarching answer, but I can tell you, because I do this a lot with NP applicants and reinstatements, that there is a sort of a provisional approval under the refresher umbrella. So it's approval, and this is the whole point of the approval process, is so during that refresher course until complete, you have approval from the North Carolina Board of Nursing to work with these preceptors at this specific practice site until this refresher course is complete. And so we have a lot of, again, I'm using the NPs as an example, that do seek out former colleagues or colleagues that they know, or it actually helps with job placement if they don't already have a position, to work with in this case, a preceptor for the allotted amount of time for that clinical experience. And then the CEs are, again, pulled from, in this case, the certification maintenance program or the reinstatement. I guess they recertify. I think CNMs, if I recall just off the top of my head, if they let their certification expire, they have to retake the exam. And they also have to prove CEs for, I believe it's 10 hours for every year that would have been in that 5-year renewal period. So you can use some of that education. A lot of that CE is independent unless it's built into the orientation of the new employment. And like I said, if they are not currently employed or if they are starting a new practice, they would seek this experience with a colleague or a CNM or a OBGYN somewhere within the state to be able to get those hours. And again, like I said, the CE could be independent through AMCB or whatever is appropriate.
Dr. Hildebrand, you had your hand up earlier. Do you still have a point of discussion?
Not at this point, thank you.
Any other further discussion? Well, thank you for your participation in that discussion. So the staff recommendation is to leave the rule 0115 inactive status as written. Is there a motion to adopt rule 0115 inactive status as proposed in the packet and direct staff to proceed with rulemaking?
I motion. Jason Hildebrand.
Jason Hildebrand has made a motion. Do I have a second?
I second Dr. Haraway Smith.
Dr. Haraway Smith has seconded the motion. Now that we have a second, I will call for a vote. When your name is called, please respond approve if you are in favor of the motion or opposed if you're not in favor of the motion. Dr. Jason Hildebrand.
Approve.
Dr. Carolyn Haraway Smith.
Approve.
Dr. LaDonna Thomas.
Approve.
Frank DeMarco.
Approve.
Dr. Sharana Johnson.
Approved.
Dr. Robert Rich.
Approve.
Meg Barrett.
Approved.
Dr. John Rusher.
Approve.
Stephanie Godfrey, approve. Motion passes. From Ms. Paris's presentation, these rules will be submitted to the OAH for consideration by the Rules Review Commission to adopt the temporary rules. We anticipate the rules will be heard by the RRC on September 21st. If approved by RRC, the temporary rules will be entered into the Administrative Code rules. At our annual meeting in November, we will begin the permanent rulemaking process for those rules. As a reminder, the annual meeting of the Midwifery Joint Committee will take place on November 14th, 2023. Thank you for your attendance and participation in this called meeting of the Midwifery Joint Committee. Do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Can I ask a question first?
Oh,
Is that an in-person meeting or a Teams meeting?
That is an in-person meeting, Dr. Hildebrand.
Thank you. And I make a motion to adjourn.
Dr. Hildebrand has made a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Frank DeMarco will second.
Frank DeMarco has seconded the motion. All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. This concludes today's called meeting of the Midwifery Joint Committee.
Thank you all.
Thank you.